October 12th, 2023. That was the date written at the top of the ledger. To the rest of the world, it was just a Thursday. But for 19-year-old Sophie Mercer, it was the day she discovered her father had put a price tag on her life. $12.4 million. We've all heard stories about desperate times calling for desperate measures. But this isn't a story about desperation. This is a story about a girl sold like property, a CEO who bought her like an asset, and the woman who wanted them both destroyed. What happens when you become collateral in someone else's debt? When your signature on a contract means more than your consent? When the man who owns you isn't the monster you should fear? Buckle up. This is the story of the Blackwood arrangement. The rain in Silver Creek didn't wash things clean. It just made everything slicker, harder to hold on to. The town sat in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, a place where the old timber money had dried up decades ago, and nothing new had come to replace it. Population 3,000 and dropping. The kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did, where the diners served the same meatloaf, special for 30 years, where young people left and never came back. Sophie Mercer had planned to be one of those people who left. She had made it as far as Oregon State University's second-year data analytics major. She was good with numbers, good at seeing patterns where other people saw chaos. Her professors said she had a gift for forensic accounting, for following the money trail, until it led somewhere ugly. She had wanted to work for the FBI someday, or maybe the SEC, catching white-collar criminals who thought they were too smart to get caught. But then her father made a phone call. September 15th, 2 in the morning. Sophie, you need to come home. Now. His voice had that quality to it, the one that meant he'd been drinking, the one that meant something had gone very wrong. She had heard that voice too many times since her mother died 10 years ago. Cancer, they said. But Sophie always wondered if it was really the weight of being married to Richard Mercer that killed her. She drove home the next morning. 4 hours through mountain roads, the autumn colors blurring past her windows. She told herself it would be a weekend trip. Help Dad with whatever crisis he'd manufactured. Be back in Eugene by Monday for her statistics midterm. She had been lying to herself for a long time. It was easier than facing the truth. Silver Creek looked smaller every time she came back. The timber mill her grandfather had built sat abandoned at the edge of town, windows broken, equipment rusting in the rain. The Mercer family house, a Victorian relic from the 1900s, loomed on the hill overlooking Main Street. 3 stories of peeling paint and memories Sophie would rather forget. Her mother's roses in the garden had gone wild, thorny, and overgrown. Richard Mercer met her at the door. He looked older than 56. Gray stubble on his jaw, shirt, wrinkled eyes bloodshot. He'd been handsome once, the kind of man who commanded respect when he walked into a room. Now he looked like he was shrinking, folding in on himself under the weight of whatever he'd done. We need to talk, Princess. He'd called her that since she was 5. Princess. Like she was something precious, something to be protected. The irony would hit her later. They sat in his study, a room that smelled of old leather and older whiskey. The walls were lined with photos of better days. Her grandfather shaking hands with the governor. Her father cutting the ribbon at the mill expansion in 2005. Sophie's high school graduation cap and gown, her mother's necklace around her neck. The only photo where everyone was smiling and it wasn't a lie. Richard poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, didn't offer her any, started talking without looking at her. Silver Creek Timber Corp is bankrupt. We're 90 days past due on $8.2 million in loans. The bank is foreclosing. Equipment liquidation barely covers half. I've got 300 employees who will be out of work by Christmas. The town dies with the company. You understand that, right? When we go under, Silver Creek goes under. Sophie understood. She'd seen the signs for years. The contracts her father couldn't land. The expansion projects that went nowhere. The expensive consultants who promised turnarounds that never materialized. But $8 million was more than mismanagement. That was something else. Where did the rest go, Dad? Richard drank, didn't answer. Sophie stood up, walked to his desk. The ledger was there, lying open like he wanted her to see it, like he'd been staring at it for hours before she arrived, trying to make the numbers say something different. She picked it up. Her hands were steady. They wouldn't shake until later. The first page was standard corporate debt, bank loans with interest rates that made her wince, vendor invoices 6 months overdue, payroll deferred, nothing illegal, just the slow death spiral of a failing business. But then she turned to page 12. And that's where the story changed. Tulalip Tribal Casino, Snoqualmie Casino, Muckleshoot, Cache Creek in California. All the places within driving distance where a man with a gambling problem could lose himself and his fortune. Dates going back 3 years. Cash withdrawals, Wire transfers. The numbers got bigger as the dates got more recent. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. On one night in Vegas, $475,000 disappeared between midnight and 4 a.m. The total at the bottom of the page was 4.4 million, written in her father's handwriting, underlined twice. Sophie felt something cold settle in her stomach. It wasn't surprise. Some part of her had always known. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way her mother had looked at him in the last year of her life, like she was mourning someone who was already gone. So it's 12.4 million total. 8.2 in business debt, 4.4 in gambling. She kept her voice level. Professional, like she was auditing a stranger's finances. And the foreclosure notice gives you 30 days to pay or lose everything. That's what you called me home for, to tell me we're finished. Richard finished his scotch, poured another. There's a way out. Sophie waited. The rain hammered against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a pipe was dripping. Her father pulled a newspaper clipping from his desk drawer, set it down in front of her. The paper was wrinkled like he'd read it 100 times, folded and unfolded, tried to make it say something different. Seattle Business Journal, dated 2 months ago. The headline read, "Blackwood Seeks Strategic Alliance." The photo showed a man in his 30s, dark suit, darker expression, angular face, eyes like winter rain. Silas Blackwood, 32, CEO of Blackwood Industries. Net worth estimated at $3.2 billion. The article described him as a corporate shark, a man who'd turned his family's coal mining operation into a diversified energy empire. Timber, hydroelectric, wind farms, mineral rights across 3 states. He owned the bank that held Silver Creek's loans. He owned the land the timber rights sat on. He owned the power company that lit the town at night. The article mentioned almost as an aside that Blackwood was seeking a marriage arrangement. It used that exact phrase. Not a wife, an arrangement. Financial terms negotiable. Contact through his corporate attorney. Sophie read the article twice. Then she looked at her father. No, Richard wouldn't meet her eyes. I already made contact, had a meeting last week. His people drew up a contract. It's fair, Sophie, more than fair. He cancels all the debt, all 12.4 million. You live in his estate, get an allowance, full medical coverage. After 2 years, you can file for divorce and walk away with a settlement. It's just business, a transaction. Sophie's hands finally started shaking. She set the newspaper down carefully like it might explode. You're selling me. I'm saving 300 families. You're selling me to pay for your gambling debts. Richard's face crumpled. Tears ran down into his stubble. It was the first time Sophie had seen him cry since her mother's funeral. It should have moved her. It didn't. I don't have a choice, Princess. If I don't do this, the foreclosure goes through. The mill closes. Every family in this town loses everything. The bank will come for the house. You won't have anywhere to go back to. At least this way you're taken care of. You're safe. Safe. The word hung in the air like smoke. Sophie walked to the window. Outside, Silver Creek stretched into the rain. The closed storefronts on Main Street. The houses with peeling paint and sagging roofs. The elementary school where she'd learned to read now half empty because young families couldn't afford to stay. 300 employees at the mill, each of them with kids' mortgages, car payments, grocery bills, doctor's appointments, futures that depended on a paycheck that wouldn't come if Richard Mercer's company collapsed. She thought about her mother. Mary Mercer had grown up in this town, married into the timber family, played her role for 23 years. She'd hosted charity luncheons and smiled at ribbon cuttings and never once complained about the loneliness of being married to a man who was always somewhere else. What had that gotten her? A grave on the hill and a daughter who'd spent 10 years trying to escape. Let me see the contract. Richard opened his desk drawer, pulled out a manila folder thick with paper, set it on the desk like an offering. Sophie picked it up. The cover page was heavy cream paper, watermarked. Professional. The letterhead read Hayes and Associates Corporate Law. She read standing up. Her data analytics training kicked in, scanning for the important clauses, the trapdoors, the fine print where they hide the poison. Marriage arrangement agreement between Silas Blackwood, party of the first part, and Sophie Ann Mercer, party of the second part. Effective date to be determined upon execution. Minimum term 2 years from effective date. Terms and conditions. Party. A Silas Blackwood agrees to assume and cancel all outstanding debts of Richard Mercer and Silver Creek Timber Corporation, totaling $12,400,000. Party B. Sophie Mercer agrees to enter into legal marriage with Party A and fulfill all duties customary to the role of Mrs. Blackwood for the minimum term stated above. Compensation: Party B shall receive a personal allowance of $10,000 per month deposited into an account in her name. Party B shall have full access to medical, dental, and mental health services. Party B shall reside in Party A's primary residence and have access to all amenities thereof. Then came Clause 7, the one that changed everything: suspension of debt. The debt cancellation described in Section 2 shall be considered suspended, not forgiven. In the event that Party B fails to complete the minimum 2-year term, commits adultery, abandons the marriage, or fails to fulfill duties as outlined in Section 12, the debt shall be immediately reinstated in full, with interest calculated at 18% per annum. Party A shall have the right to pursue immediate collection against Richard Mercer and all assets of Silver Creek Timber Corporation. Sophie read it 3 times. The words didn't change. She wasn't being sold. She was being held hostage. If she ran, if she failed, if she broke any rule in this corporate manual they called a marriage, her father would lose everything anyway. The debt would come back with interest. 18% on $12 million was over $2 million a year. In 5 years, the debt would double. She was collateral, a guarantee, a human insurance policy against her father's failures. There's no prenuptial agreement, she said quietly. Section 18 says standard divorce law applies after the 2-year term. Richard nodded. That was his one concession. If you make it 2 years, you can file for divorce, and you'll get half of everything acquired during the marriage. Blackwood's attorney tried to argue for a prenup. Silas said no. He said, and Richard's voice dropped to barely a whisper, if she's brave enough to sign this, she deserves to be protected when she leaves. Sophie looked at the signature line at the bottom of the final page. Silas Blackwood's signature was already there. Dark ink, aggressive slashes. The signature of a man who signed contracts the way other men went to war. How long do I have to decide? 48 hours. He wants an answer by October 14th. If you say no, we proceed with bankruptcy. I've already talked to a lawyer about Chapter 7. We'll lose the house, the company, everything. I'll probably end up in a trailer in Yakima, but you'd be free, princess. You could go back to school. Finish your degree. You don't owe me this. You don't owe anyone this. Sophie closed the folder, set it down on the desk, walked out of the study without another word. She needed air, needed space, needed to think without her father's tears and whiskey breath filling the room. The rain had stopped. The evening air smelled like wet pine and wood smoke. Sophie walked down Main Street past the shuttered hardware store, past the diner where old men drank coffee and talked about the good old days when timber was king. She walked to the cemetery on the East Hill where her mother was buried under a headstone that read Mary Catherine Mercer, beloved wife and mother, 1975 to 2013. Sophie sat on the wet grass next to the grave, started talking like her mother could hear her, like the dead cared about the problems of the living. He did it again, Mom. Dad gambled away everything, and now he wants me to fix it. He wants me to marry some billionaire I've never met, live in some mansion playhouse for 2 years so he doesn't lose his company. And the worst part, I'm actually considering it. The wind moved through the pine trees. A crow called from somewhere in the dark. You would tell me to do it, wouldn't you? You'd say, that's what women in our family do. We sacrifice, we smile, we take care of the men who can't take care of themselves. You did it for 23 years, and it killed you just as much as the cancer did. Sophie pulled her phone from her pocket, opened Google, typed Silas Blackwood. The search results loaded. The first link was his company website, Blackwood Industries. Corporate headquarters in Seattle, satellite offices in Portland and Spokane. Revenue last year, $870 million. The photo on the About page showed Silas in a conference room, arms crossed, staring down the camera like he was daring it to blink first. Tall, maybe 6'2", dark hair cut military short, a face that looked carved from stone by someone who forgot to add warmth. The second link was a news article. Seattle Times in October 2019. CEO acquitted in business partner death. Sophie clicked at it. The article described a case from 4 years ago. Silas Blackwood had been charged with criminally negligent homicide after his business partner, James Kellerman, died in an industrial accident at one of their mining sites. The prosecution argued Blackwood had ignored safety violations to meet a deadline, resulting in Kellerman's death. The defense argued Kellerman had entered a restricted area against protocol. The jury acquitted Blackwood after 3 days of deliberation, but the article included a quote from the victim's widow. He's a monster who cares more about money than human life. My husband is dead because Silas Blackwood wanted to save 6 weeks on a project timeline. The law might have let him walk free, but God knows what he did. Sophie read the article twice. Then she scrolled through the rest of the search results. There were charity appearances, business awards, photos of Silas at galas in $1,000 suits. But there were no personal photos, no girlfriend on his arm, no family snapshots, no social media presence. Silas Blackwood was a ghost who only materialized when there was money to be made or a contract to be signed. This was the man who wanted to marry her. A 32-year-old billionaire who could have anyone and chose instead to post a classified ad in the business section looking for a wife. A man who'd been accused of killing his business partner and walked away without a scratch. Sophie's phone buzzed. Text message from Liam Park. Heard you're back in town. Want to grab coffee, Liam? 19 years old, same as Sophie. They'd grown up together, gone to the same schools, learned to drive on the same back roads. His father, David Park, had been Silver Creek Timber's CFO until Richard had to let him go last year when the money dried up. Liam had stayed in town after graduation, taking community college classes online, helping his dad with contract accounting work. He'd asked Sophie out twice before she left for Oregon State. She'd said no both times. She loved Liam like a brother, like a memory of a childhood that felt impossibly far away now. She texted back, meet me at the Overlook. 20 minutes. The Overlook was a turnout on Highway 2 halfway up the mountain, where you could see all of Silver Creek spread out below. Sophie drove her 10-year-old Honda up the winding road, headlights cutting through the dark. Liam's truck was already there when she arrived. He leaned against the hood, hands in his jacket pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. He was tall, lean, with black hair that fell into his eyes, and his father's Korean features softened by his mother's Irish side. He smiled when he saw Sophie, that easy smile that had gotten him through every awkward moment since they were kids. You look terrible, he said. It was Liam's version of hello. My dad is selling me to Silas Blackwood for $12 million. What's your excuse? Liam's smile disappeared. He pushed off the truck, closed the distance between them. Sophie, what are you talking about? She told him everything. The gambling debts, the foreclosure, the marriage arrangement contract sitting on her father's desk with a signature line waiting for her name. She kept her voice flat, factual, like she was presenting a case study in her economics class. Numbers and terms and clauses. If she let emotion in, she'd fall apart, and she couldn't afford that yet. Liam listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, don't do it. 300 people lose their jobs if I don't. Then they lose their jobs. Sophie, you can't marry someone you've never met to pay for your dad's mistakes. That's insane. That's futile. We don't live in the Middle Ages. Tell that to the bank. Tell that to the families who won't make rent in November. Liam grabbed her shoulders, looked her in the eyes. His hands were warm even through her jacket. Run away with me, tonight. I've got $8,000 saved. We drive to Montana. My cousin has a place in Missoula. We figure it out. You go back to school. I get a job. We start over. You don't owe your father this. You don't owe anyone this. For a moment, Sophie let herself imagine it. Throwing her suitcase in Liam's truck, driving through the night, disappearing into a new life where Richard Mercer's debts couldn't follow. She'd change her name, dye her hair, become someone else, someone who didn't carry the weight of an entire town on her shoulders. But then she thought about Clause 7, debt reinstated with interest. If she ran, Richard wouldn't just lose the company. He'd be buried so deep in debt he'd never climb out. And 300 families would lose everything because Sophie Mercer decided to save herself instead of doing the hard thing. She stepped back from Liam's grip, shook her head. I can't. If I run, it gets worse. The contract is designed to trap me. If I leave, if I fail, the debt comes back with 18% interest. My dad would be destroyed, completely. There'd be nothing left. Then let him be destroyed, Liam said, and there was heat in his voice now. Anger. He did this, Sophie. He gambled away millions. He lost your family's company. These are his consequences, not yours. You're 19 years old. You're supposed to be in college, living in a dorm, figuring out who you want to be. You're not supposed to be a sacrifice on the altar of your father's bad decisions. He was right. Sophie knew he was right. Every logical part of her brain screamed that Liam was right. But logic didn't pay the bills. Logic didn't keep 300 families fed. Logic didn't honor the memory of a mother who'd spent 23 years sacrificing herself for a man who didn't deserve it. I have to see it through, Sophie said quietly. 2 years. I can survive anything for 2 years. And after that, I file for divorce, take my settlement, and I'm free. Blackwood gets whatever he wants from this arrangement. I get enough money to start over on my own terms. Everyone wins. Except you lose 2 years of your life. I already lost them the day my dad picked up a poker chip. Liam looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into a hug, the king that felt like goodbye even though neither of them said the word. When he let go, there were tears in his eyes. If you need anything, he said, if you need a way out, if you need someone to come get you in the middle of the night, you call me. I don't care if it's 2 years from now. You call me and I'll be there. Okay, Sophie nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. She drove back to the Mercer house. The study light was still on. Her father was still at his desk, still staring at the ledger like the numbers might change if he looked hard enough. Sophie walked in without knocking, picked up the pen lying next to the contract, found the signature at the bottom of page 43. She thought about her mother, thought about Mary Mercer's quiet strength, the way she'd carried the weight of an entire family without complaint until the weight finally crushed her. Thought about 300 families in Silver Creek who'd wake up tomorrow with no idea that their futures depended on what a 19-year-old girl decided to do in a study that smelled like old whiskey. Sophie Ann Mercer. She signed her name in blue ink. The letters looked small and fragile next to Silas Blackwood's aggressive slashes, like a surrender next to a declaration of war. She set the pen down, looked at her father. Call his attorney. Tell him we have a deal. And Dad, this is the last time I save you. After this, you're on your own. Richard started crying again, reached for her hand. Sophie pulled away, walked upstairs to her childhood bedroom without looking back. She sat on her bed, the one she'd slept in since she was 7, surrounded by posters from high school and books from college. The room of a girl who'd had dreams once, plans, a future that belonged to her. That girl was gone now. In 48 hours, she'd become Mrs. Silas Blackwood. Collateral in a deal she didn't negotiate. A price tag on a debt she didn't owe. Sophie pulled out her phone, Googled one more thing before she tried to sleep. How to survive a marriage to a stranger. The search returned 3 million results. None of them looked promising. October 14th came faster than Sophie expected. She spent the 2 days packing her life into a single suitcase. Clothes, her mother's jewelry box, photos, her laptop, and the accounting textbooks she'd need if she ever went back to school. Everything else she left behind. The stuffed animals from childhood, the trophies from high school debate team, the cap and gown from graduation. They belonged to the old Sophie, the one who didn't exist anymore. 6 a.m., still dark outside. Her father drove her in his pickup truck, the same Ford he'd driven for 15 years, rusted and rattling on the mountain roads. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered had already been decided, signed sealed in blue ink on cream paper. The meeting point was the border bridge, an old steel structure spanning a gorge where the Whitewater River raged 200 feet below. It connected Silver Creek territory to what everyone local called the Blackwood Domain. 50,000 acres of mountain forest mineral rights, hydroelectric dams. A private empire built on old coal money and new energy contracts. The bridge was the threshold. Once Sophie crossed it, she'd be in Silas Blackwood's world, subject to his rules, his property and everything but name. Richard pulled the truck to a stop at the south end of the bridge, cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Outside fog clung to the river gorge, turning the world into shades of gray. The sun hadn't risen yet. It felt like a funeral. Sophie opened the passenger door. The cold air hit her like a slap. She wore her graduation dress, the simple white one her mother had bought her before the cancer got bad. It was the closest thing she had to a wedding gown. Over it, a heavy wool coat that smelled like mothballs. She pulled her suitcase from the truck bed, refusing her father's help. "I'll wait," Richard said. "Make sure everything's okay." Sophie looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in 2 days. He'd aged a decade in 48 hours. The weight of what he'd done was eating him alive. Good. Let it eat him. Let him spend the next 2 years remembering that he sold his daughter to save himself. "Don't wait," Sophie said. "Just go home. I don't want you here." She walked onto the bridge before he could respond. Her heels clicked on the metal grating, the sound echoing off the gorge walls. Click, 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 like a countdown, like a clock ticking toward zero. The fog was thick enough that Sophie couldn't see the other side of the bridge. She walked blind, trusting that something was there, that this wasn't all an elaborate prank, that she hadn't signed her life away for nothing. Her suitcase wheels rattled over the uneven surface. The river roared below, white water over black rocks, loud enough to drown out thought. Then she heard it. The low purr of expensive engines, not the rattle of pickup trucks or the wheeze of old sedans. This was money. Power. the sound of machines that cost more than houses. Three black SUVs emerged from the fog like shadows gaining substance. Massive vehicles armored the kind you saw in presidential motorcades or military convoys. They moved in perfect formation, slow and deliberate predators who didn't need to rush because nothing could stop them. They came to a halt exactly in the middle of the bridge, blocking Sophie's path. She stopped walking, waited. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face calm. She'd learned that from her mother. Never let them see fear. Fear was weakness, and weakness was an invitation to be devoured. The doors of the lead SUV opened. Two men stepped out first. They were enormous, 6'4", at least shoulders, like linebackers wearing dark suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of body armor underneath. Security. The kind who'd been military, once special forces, maybe men who knew 50 ways to kill and chose to get paid for restraint instead. They scanned the bridge, the fog, the tree line beyond, hands hovering near their waistbands. Then, satisfied, one of them nodded toward the middle vehicle. The rear door of the center SUV opened. Silas Blackwood stepped out. He wasn't what Sophie expected. The photos hadn't prepared her. They'd shown a businessman severe and distant, someone you'd see on a magazine cover or across a conference table. They hadn't shown this, the way he moved, economical and predatory. The way he carried himself like the world was his and everyone else just lived in it. He was tall. Yes, the photos had that right. 6'2", maybe 6'3". Dark hair cut military short, emphasizing the harsh angles of his face. High cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it could cut glass. But it was his eyes that stopped Sophie cold. Gray. Not the warm gray of storm clouds or river stones. Cold. Calculating. Eyes that assessed and calculated and revealed nothing. He wore a black suit with no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. Not casual, deliberate, like he'd decided ties were a constraint he no longer needed to accept. The suit fit him perfectly, tailored to measure the kind that cost $5,000 and looked like 10. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to mirror brightness. Every detail of his appearance was controlled, calculated, designed to send a message. I am wealth. I am power. I am the man who owns the board, not the one who sits on it. He looked at Sophie. Just looked, didn't smile, didn't speak, took her in with those calculating eyes, head to toe, the kind of assessment you'd give a horse before purchase. Clinical, bloodless. Sophie felt naked under that gaze, like he could see through the white dress and wool coat to the scared 19-year-old underneath the girl who was signing her life away to save people who'd never asked to be saved. She forced herself to stand tall, lifted her chin, met his eyes and didn't look away. She was a mercer. She might be sold, but she wouldn't be cowed. 5 feet between them, an impossible distance, a nothing distance. Silas Blackwood closed it in 3 strides. Up close he was more tall, more present, more dangerous. He smelled like expensive cologne sandalwood and something darker, and underneath that the scent of real power. Not the kind you bought, the kind you were born with. You're small, he said. His voice was a baritone, smooth and emotionless as a blade sliding from a sheath. I'm durable, Sophie replied. Her voice didn't shake. Small miracle. One of the security guards snickered. Silas held up one finger. The guard went silent instantly. That was power too, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. Silas took a step closer. Now they were 3 feet apart. Sophie could see the scar on his neck, a thin white line that disappeared into his collar. Old wound, deep, the kind that should have killed. But here he stood. Do you understand the term, Silas asked? I read the contract. Reading and understanding aren't the same thing. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold fountain pen and a leather folder. Opened it, held it out to her. Do you understand Clause 7? Sophie looked at the document, the marriage contract, all 43 pages of it, her signature already there in blue ink, his signature in black. One blank space remaining. Today's date. The debt is suspended, Sophie said carefully. Not forgiven. If I leave, if I fail, if I break the terms, the debt is reinstated with 18% interest and you seize everything my father owns immediately. Good. Silas's face didn't change. No approval, no warmth, just acknowledgement that she'd passed a test. Most people don't read Clause 7 carefully enough. They see the money, the allowance, the estate. They think they're getting a good deal. They don't realize they're signing a hostage agreement. So why do it this way, Sophie asked. You could have just bought the company, foreclosed on my father. Why this? Silas studied her for a long moment. Then surprisingly he answered, Because an acquisition would take 8 months, cost me legal fees, and end with 300 unemployed people in a dead town. This way I get what I need, your father keeps his company, and Silver Creek survives. Everyone wins, except me. You get $10,000 a month and full access to an estate worth $40 million. You get 2 years of security. After that, you file for divorce and walk away with a settlement that'll set you up for life. Seems like you're winning too. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to ask what he needed from this arrangement that was worth $12.4 million. But the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a contract signing. The terms were set. The only question was whether she'd follow through. "Where do I sign?" Silas set the folder on the hood of the SUV, handed her the pen. It was heavy gold, the kind that cost more than her suitcase and everything in it. Sophie clicked it once. The sound seemed loud in the fog. She signed, Sophie Mercer. The black ink looked permanent, final, like something you couldn't take back even if you wanted to. Silas took the folder back, snapped it shut without looking at her signature, handed it to one of the security guards. Done. She was his now. Legally, contractually, $12.4 million worth of obligation and trapped futures. "Get in," Silas said, gesturing to the open SUV door. "My suitcase. You won't need anything from your old life. We have everything you require at the estate. My mother's necklace is in that bag." Silas paused, looked at the worn suitcase in her hand. For just a second, something flickered in those gray eyes. Not warmth, maybe recognition. The understanding that some things couldn't be replaced with money. He nodded to the guard, put it in the trunk. The guard took the suitcase. Sophie climbed into the back seat of the SUV. The leather was soft butter, smooth, heated against the October cold. It smelled like him, sandalwood and power. Silas climbed in beside her. The door shut with a heavy thunk, sealing them in. The lock engaged. Not loud, just a quiet click that said, "You're mine now." The convoy turned around and began driving back toward Obsidian Ridge. Sophie didn't look out the rear window. Didn't watch her father's truck disappear into the fog. Didn't say goodbye to Silver Creek or the girl she'd been 3 days ago. That life was over. This life, whatever it was, had begun. Silas pulled out a tablet, started reading emails. Didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge that she was there sitting 2 feet away. Her entire future rewritten by a signature in black ink. The silence stretched. Sophie watched the fog-shrouded trees pass by. The road climbed higher into the mountains, away from Silver Creek, away from everything familiar. Finally, Silas spoke without looking up from his screen. "Put your seatbelt on, Sophie. The roads are winding. I'd hate to damage my investment on the first day." Sophie clicked the belt into place, stared straight ahead. Investment. That's what she was now. Not a wife, not a partner. An investment. $12.4 million of human collateral in a deal she didn't negotiate. She realized then that fear wasn't the worst part of this arrangement. She'd expected fear. Expected to be terrified of the man they called the Butcher, the CEO who'd been accused of killing his business partner and walked free. But sitting next to Silas Blackwood, sealed in expensive leather and engineered silence. Sophie felt something worse than fear. She felt cold, not the cold of October weather. The cold that settled in your bones when you realized you were completely, utterly alone. She was sitting next to her husband, the most powerful man in 3 states, and she had never felt more isolated in her entire life. The SUV climbed higher. Obsidian Ridge was waiting, and Sophie Mercer, 19 years old, sold for her father's debts, had no choice but to meet it. The road to Obsidian Ridge took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional ping of Silas's tablet as emails arrived and were dismissed with clinical efficiency. Sophie watched the landscape change through tinted windows. They left behind the struggling timber towns, the shuttered gas stations, the trailer parks with rusted cars on cinder blocks. The road climbed into old-growth forest where the trees were thick as houses and the canopy blocked out the sky. Then higher, still past the tree line, into territory that felt more like a fortress than a home. The estate appeared suddenly emerging from the mountain like it had grown there, not grown. Been carved. Obsidian Ridge wasn't a house, it was a statement. Brutalist architecture in black steel and floor-to-ceiling glass, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. It looked like a weapon, like something designed to intimidate before you even reached the front door. 3 stories of dark glass reflecting the gray October sky. Wings spreading east and west like a predator's outstretched arms. No warmth, no welcome, just power rendered in concrete and steel. The convoy pulled through massive iron gates that opened automatically, sensors reading the approach before any human hand could reach a button. The driveway was paved stone smooth as silk, winding through manicured grounds where every tree looked placed with surgical precision. A fountain dominated the circular drive in front of the main entrance. Black marble carved into geometric shapes, water cascading over edges in sheets that caught the light and turned it silver. The fountain was beautiful. It was also somehow menacing, like everything else about this place. The SUV stopped. A guard opened Sophie's door before she could reach for the handle. She stepped out onto stone that probably cost more per square foot than most people's rent. The air here was different, cleaner, colder. They were far above Silver Creek, now high enough that the rest of the world felt like something distant and theoretical. Silas exited from the other side, already moving toward the entrance before Sophie had fully oriented herself. He walked like a man who'd made this journey 10,000 times, who knew every stone and shadow, who owned every molecule of air in this place because he'd paid for the privilege. He didn't wait for her, didn't look back, just expected her to follow. Sophie grabbed her coat tighter and walked after him. Her heels clicked on the stone. The sound felt intrusive here, too loud, too human in this landscape of money and control. The front doors were solid steel, 20 feet tall, opening automatically as Silas approached. Sophie followed him into the foyer and stopped. Her breath caught despite her determination to remain impassive. The interior was even more severe than the exterior. The floor was polished concrete, dark gray, reflecting the overhead lights like still water. The walls were a lighter gray, smooth as paper, punctuated by abstract art in violent slashes of red and black. No landscapes, no portraits, just geometry and aggression. The ceiling soared 3 stories up to a skylight that let in cold northern light. A staircase of black steel and glass floated up one wall, each step cantilevered in a way that seemed to defy physics. Everything was designed to make you feel small, temporary, replaceable. The temperature inside was Arctic. Sophie's breath didn't fog, but it felt like it should, like the house itself was hostile to warmth, to life, to anything soft. Mrs. Weaver, Silas's voice echoed in the vast space. A woman appeared from a side corridor, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who'd learned to make herself unobtrusive. She was 50s, maybe early 60s, wearing a severe gray suit that matched the walls. Her hair was pulled back so tight, it stretched the skin at her temples. Her face was professionally neutral, the blank expression that came from years of service in houses where emotions were weaknesses. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Not sir, just his name. Professional, distant." "This is Sophie," Silas said, gesturing vaguely in her direction without actually looking at her. "She'll be staying in the East Wing. The Blue Suite, get her settled." Sophie blinked. The Blue Suite, not our bedroom, not the master suite. The phrasing was careful, deliberate. She opened her mouth to ask, but Silas was already moving, walking toward a glass elevator on the far side of the foyer. "Wait," Sophie said. I thought Silas stopped, turned. Those gray eyes focused on her for the first time since they'd entered the house. "What did you think? That we'd—" Sophie's voice faltered. "That I'd be—" The words died in her throat. She couldn't say it, couldn't voice the assumption that had been lurking beneath her fear since she signed the contract. That being his wife meant sharing his space, his bed, his life in some tangible way. "We have a contract," Silas said. His voice was flat, factual, explaining something obvious to someone slow. "I bought peace for your father's company. You bought safety for 300 families. That's the extent of the transaction. You'll have your own quarters, your own space. A generous allowance deposited monthly. You'll have access to the library, the gym, the grounds. In exchange, you'll attend public functions with me when required. Smile for photographs. Wear the appropriate attire. Other than that—" He paused. His expression didn't change, but something in his voice sharpened. "Stay out of my way." He turned back to the elevator. The doors opened at his approach like they'd been waiting. He stepped inside, pressed a button. The doors began to close. "Dinner is at 7 if I'm available," he said through the narrowing gap. "Mrs. Weaver will show you how things work here." The door sealed shut. Silas disappeared upward toward whatever floor he occupied. Toward his real life, the one that didn't include a teenage bride bought for debt relief. Sophie stood in the foyer. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. She was married, legally bound, and her husband had just assigned her to a guest room and told her to stay out of his way. Mrs. Weaver cleared her throat softly. "If you'll follow me, Mrs. Blackwood." The title sounded strange. Wrong. Mrs. Blackwood. Sophie was 19. She'd been married for less than an hour. She felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. She followed Mrs. Weaver through corridors of glass and steel. The house was enormous, labyrinthine. Hallways branched in directions Sophie couldn't track. Everything looked the same. Gray walls, dark floors, abstract art that probably cost more than a car, but communicated nothing except wealth. They passed a gym where men in tactical gear were lifting weights in complete silence. Security guards, Sophie realized. Or maybe soldiers. Whatever Silas Blackwood needed, he had. They passed a library 2 stories of books behind climate-controlled glass. They passed what looked like a medical facility, complete with exam tables and equipment Sophie recognized from hospitals. They passed offices where people worked at computers heads down, no one looking up as she passed. It felt less like a home and more like a corporate headquarters. Cold, efficient, empty of anything that resembled normal human life. The east wing was separated from the main house by a glass corridor. Through the windows, Sophie could see the mountain dropping away below, forests stretching to the horizon. The view was stunning. It was also vertiginous, like walking through sky. She kept her eyes forward, following Mrs. Weaver's rigid back. The blue suite was at the end of the east wing. Mrs. Weaver opened the door with a key card, handed it to Sophie without ceremony. The room number. Not a room. A series of rooms. Suite was an understatement. Sophie stepped through the doorway into a space larger than the entire first floor of her childhood home. The living area had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, modern furniture in shades of cream and gray. A kitchen area with appliances Sophie had only seen in magazine spreads. A dining table that could seat 8. And through an open doorway, a bedroom with a bed the size of a small car. Sophie walked to the bedroom in a daze. The bed was made with linens that looked too pristine to sleep on. The closet was a walk-in the size of her college dorm room, and it was full. Dresses, suits, casual wear, shoes all in her size. She pulled out a blouse, silk, designer label, probably cost $500. Who bought these? Sophie asked. Miss Vane selected your wardrobe, Mrs. Weaver said from the doorway. She handles all domestic arrangements for Mr. Blackwood. Sophie hung the blouse back up. Is that what I am? A domestic arrangement? Mrs. Weaver's expression didn't change. Dinner is at 7 in the main dining room if Mr. Blackwood joins. Otherwise, you may order room service through the tablet on the kitchen counter. Do not disturb Mr. Blackwood in the West Wing without explicit permission. Breakfast is available from 6 to 10 in the main kitchen or delivered here. The gym is open 24 hours, but security trains from 5 to 7 a.m. The library is... How long have you worked here? Sophie interrupted. Mrs. Weaver paused. 12 years. And in 12 years, how many other women have stayed in this room? Mrs. Weaver's face remained blank, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, maybe, or pity. You're the first Mrs. Blackwood. She left. The door closed with a magnetic seal, soft and final. Sophie was alone. She walked to the windows. The view was staggering. Mountains and forest and sky stretching forever. She was in a palace, fed and clothed and given everything money could buy. And she had never felt more like a prisoner in her entire life. The first week passed in isolated luxury. Sophie explored the house during the day, learning its rhythms. She discovered the main kitchen, a professional-grade facility where staff prepared meals in quiet efficiency. She found the library 2 stories of books behind glass and spent hours there reading about corporate law and merger acquisitions, trying to understand the world she'd been sold into. She found the gym and used the treadmill at night when the security guards weren't there, running until her legs burned and her mind finally quieted. But she didn't see Silas, not once. He left before she woke and returned after she slept. Or maybe he was always in the West Wing, that forbidden sanctuary she wasn't allowed to enter. Meals were delivered to her room, breakfast, lunch, dinner, food that probably came from Michelin-starred kitchens and tasted like cardboard in her mouth. She ate alone, slept alone, woke alone in that enormous bed in the blue suite, and wondered if this was what the next 2 years would feel like, buried alive in silk and steel. On the 8th day, Sophie broke protocol. It was 2 in the morning. She couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, her thoughts too loud. She pulled on a robe and left the suite, padding through the dark corridors on bare feet. The kitchen was at the center of the main house, stainless steel and gleaming surfaces, empty at this hour. Sophie found the tea cabinet, pulled out chamomile, filled a kettle with water. The act of making tea felt grounding, human, normal, like she was a person and not a decorative acquisition. You're not supposed to be in here. Sophie spun around. A woman stood in the doorway. She was striking in a way that made Sophie's breath catch. Tall, maybe 5'10", without the 4-inch stilettos she wore despite the late hour. Platinum blonde hair cut in a sharp bob that framed a face of severe beauty. High cheekbones, full lips painted red even at 2 a.m. eyes like blue ice. She wore a crimson pantsuit that fit like armor, tailored to emphasize every curve and angle. She looked like a weapon disguised as a woman. I was just making tea, Sophie said, trying to keep her voice steady. We have staff for that. The woman walked into the kitchen, movements predatory and controlled. She didn't look at Sophie, walked straight to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, leaned against the counter like she owned it, which Sophie realized she probably did in every way that mattered. I'm Caroline Vane, COO of Blackwood Industries. I suppose you're the Mercer girl. The way she said it, girl, not woman, not wife, girl, like Sophie was a child playing in adult spaces. I'm Sophie Blackwood, Sophie corrected, straightening her spine. Carolyn laughed. It was a sound without humor, dry and cutting. Right, the wife. Tell me, did you even read the prenup? Or were you too busy crying over your daddy's gambling debts? Sophie felt heat rise in her chest. I know exactly why I'm here, Miss Vane. I'm here because Silas needed something from this arrangement, and my father was the path to get it. Caroline's smile sharpened. Oh, honey, Silas didn't need your father's pathetic company. Silver Creek is a drain, a money pit. He did it because he has a savior complex. She pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them. Up close, she smelled like expensive perfume and something sharper. Ambition, maybe? Or rage. He likes broken things. But don't mistake pity for affection, sweetie. Sophie held her ground. Caroline was taller, older, clearly more powerful in every measurable way. But Sophie had survived 19 years of Richard Mercer's failures. She'd learned how to stand still when predators circled. Here's how it works at Obsidian Ridge, Caroline said softly, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. Silas runs strategy. I run operations. I handle acquisitions, mergers, personnel, logistics. I built this company from mining scraps into an empire. She looked Sophie up and down, the contempt clear. Your decoration, a write-off with a pulse. Don't try to be helpful. Don't try to be Mrs. Blackwood in any real sense. Just look pretty. Spend the allowance and stay out of the boardroom. And if I don't, Sophie asked. Carolyn leaned in close. Her breath smelled like mint and malice. If you cause problems, if you cost us even $1 in stock value, I will personally ensure that contract gets voided, and then I'll watch your father lose everything. Do we understand each other? Before Sophie could respond, the kitchen door swung open. Silas walked in. He looked exhausted. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. There was a bandage on his left forearm, white gauze stark against tan skin. He stopped when he saw them both. Carolyn, a nod. Then his eyes moved to Sophie. Sophie, just welcoming the new arrival, Silas, Carolyn said, her voice instantly changing. The ice melted into warmth, professional and smooth. She was looking for tea. I was explaining kitchen protocols. Silas walked to the coffee machine, started it without looking at either of them. Fine. Caroline, the merger files for the Copper Ridge project. Environmental impact reports are missing. Where are they? On my desk, Caroline said immediately. I was cross-referencing against EPA standards. I didn't want to bother you with raw data until it was clean. Send them tonight, Silas said. It was an order, not a request. Of course. Sophie watched them. They moved around each other with practiced ease, a dance they'd perfected over years. They spoke in shorthand references to projects and files and numbers that meant nothing to Sophie. They looked like partners, like the real couple in this arrangement. Sophie was the outsider, the stranger, the girl who'd been bought and placed in a guest room and told to stay quiet. Actually, Sophie said, her voice cutting through their exchange. Both of them turned, Silas with the coffee pot in his hand, Caroline with ice reforming in her eyes. The environmental reports for Copper Ridge. I saw them in the library yesterday. The digital folder, it was flagged as archived 2 days ago. Caroline went very still. How would you know that I was bored? Sophie said. She looked at Silas, not Caroline. I browsed the public file server. I have a degree in data analytics, or I did before. She gestured vaguely at herself, at the situation, at the absurdity of explaining her abandoned education. The folder timestamp showed a transfer at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday. If files are missing, it's because someone moved them out of the active directory. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Silas looked at Caroline, really looked at her the way he'd assessed Sophie on the bridge. Calculating, measuring. You said you were working on them, he said quietly. I moved them to archive to protect data integrity while I summarized, Caroline said smoothly. But there was something in her posture now, a tension. Fear, maybe? Or fury at being questioned. I can send you the raw files within the hour. Do that. Silas's voice had dropped an octave. It was the voice of a man who just realized something important. Something wrong. Carolyn glared at Sophie. The look lasted only a second, but it communicated everything. You just made an enemy. Then she was gone, heels clicking away down the corridor like gunshots. Silas poured his coffee, took a sip, watched Sophie over the rim of the cup. Data analytics, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I did the books for Silver Creek, Sophie replied, until my father started hiding the ledgers from me. That's how I knew how bad things were. Silas set his mug down. Don't get involved in the business, Sophie. It's dangerous. I'm already involved, she said quietly. I'm the collateral, remember. If this company fails, my father loses everything. I have every reason to care whether files go missing. Silas studied her. For the first time since the bridge, he really looked at her. Not an assessment, not a calculation. Just looking like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. Something that didn't fit his assumptions about teenage brides bought for debt relief. Dinner, he said finally. Tonight, 7 p.m., be there. He walked out, taking his coffee with him. The kitchen fell silent again. Sophie stood by the kettle, her tea forgotten, heart pounding. She'd just done something. What exactly, she wasn't sure. But she'd inserted herself into a dynamic that didn't want her there. She'd questioned Caroline Vane, the woman who ran this empire's operations. The woman who clearly thought Sophie was a temporary inconvenience to be tolerated and dismissed. Sophie poured her tea. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from something else. The first flutter of something that might have been purpose. For 8 days she'd been decoration, an acquisition. A girl in a blue suite who existed on the margins of a world she didn't understand. But she understood numbers. She understood data. She understood that files didn't archive themselves at 2 in the morning unless someone had a reason to hide them. And if there was one thing Sophie had learned from 2 years of college forensic accounting, it was this: when people hide data, they're usually hiding crimes. She carried her tea back to the blue suite, locked the door behind her, sat at the window looking out over the dark forest and darker mountains. Somewhere in this fortress of steel and glass, Silas Blackwood was working through the night, wounded and exhausted, running an empire while surrounded by people he thought he could trust. And somewhere else in this fortress, Caroline Vane was deleting files, moving money, orchestrating something that required keeping the CEO's new wife ignorant and isolated. Sophie sipped her tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. 2 years, that's what the contract said. 730 days of being decoration, staying quiet, playing the role of the grateful rescued girl. But Sophie hadn't read 2 years of corporate law textbooks to stay quiet. She'd read them because she was good at finding patterns, good at following money trails, good at catching people who thought they were too clever to get caught. Carolyn Vane had just made a mistake. She'd underestimated the girl in the blue suite. And that mistake, Sophie thought, watching the sun begin to rise over the mountains, was going to cost her everything. 7 p.m. came with the weight of obligation. Sophie stood in front of the closet in the blue suite, staring at the rows of clothes Caroline Vane had selected for her. Everything was black-white or gray, muted, restrained. The wardrobe of someone meant to blend into expensive backgrounds, to be present but not noticed. She chose a simple black dress, knee-length long sleeves. Conservative. The kind of thing you'd wear to a business dinner where you weren't invited to speak. The main dining room was on the second floor, overlooking the valley through walls of glass. Sophie found it by following the sound of silence, the particular quality of quiet that came from spaces designed to intimidate. The room was long and narrow, dominated by a table that could seat 20. Black wood polished to reflect the overhead lights. Place settings at either end, 20 feet of empty space between them. It looked less like a dinner table and more like a negotiation arena. Silas was already there, standing by the window with a glass of something amber. Whiskey, probably. He'd changed into a fresh shirt, charcoal gray, still no tie. The bandage was gone from his arm, but Sophie could see the edge of a white dressing beneath his rolled sleeve. Whatever had injured him wasn't healed yet. He turned when she entered, nodded toward the chair at the far end of the table. Sit. Sophie sat. A staff member appeared, immediately silent as smoke pouring water into crystal glasses. Another brought wine. Sophie shook her head. She needed to be sharp tonight, not softened by alcohol. Silas took the chair at the opposite end, 20 feet away. They might as well have been in different rooms. He lifted his whiskey glass, studied the liquid like it held answers, then set it down without drinking. You were at Oregon State, he said. Not a question, a statement of fact he'd pulled from some file. Data analytics, second year. Before my father needed me to come home and balance books he'd already destroyed. Why analytics? Sophie met his eyes across the empty space. Because numbers don't lie. People lie. Systems lie. But if you know how to read the numbers, you can see what's really happening underneath all the performance. Silas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. Interest, maybe, or recognition. And what were the numbers telling you about Silver Creek that my father had been hiding losses for 3 years? That he'd been taking corporate cash to the casinos and replacing it with loans he couldn't repay? That the company was a shell held together by credit and prayer? She paused. The numbers told me everything except how to stop it. Could you have stopped it? Sophie considered. No, by the time I saw the real books, it was already too late. The collapse was inevitable. I just didn't know the price of survival would be me. The staff brought the first course. Something delicate and architectural, the kind of food that was more art than sustenance. Sophie picked at it. Silas didn't touch his plate. The Copper Ridge project, he said. How much did you see in that folder? Just the metadata. File names, timestamps, transfer logs. I didn't open anything. I don't have clearance for that. But you noticed the archive timestamp. It was unusual. Large data packages don't archive themselves at 2 in the morning unless someone's working late or trying to hide something. And if Caroline was working on them like she said, they'd still be in active directories, not sealed archives. Silas leaned back in his chair. His eyes were calculating, running through scenarios. You have good instincts. I have training in finding discrepancies. Sophie set down her fork. What's in Copper Ridge that someone would want to hide? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, it's a mining reclamation project. We're converting 6 old extraction sites into conservation land. EPA oversight, federal grants, environmental compliance. If there are problems with the reports, it could kill the project and cost us $40 million in penalties. Or someone could be manufacturing problems, creating compliance issues that don't exist to sabotage the project. Why would anyone do that? Sophie shrugged. I don't know. But in forensic accounting, we learned that people hide data for 3 reasons: to cover theft, to hide incompetence, or to sabotage someone else. You'd know better than me which one applies here. Silas picked up his whiskey. This time he drank. When he set the glass down, his jaw was tight. Don't get involved in this, Sophie. Caroline has been with me for 7 years. She built the operations infrastructure that made this company profitable. If she's moving files, there's a legitimate reason. Then ask her what it is. Sophie kept her voice neutral. I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm just telling you what I saw. You've been here 8 days. Caroline has been here 7 years. Who do you think I'm going to trust? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophie had no answer that wouldn't sound defensive or naive. She was the outsider, the bought bride, the girl who'd been here barely a week while Caroline had been building this empire before Sophie even graduated high school. The staff cleared the first course, brought the second. Neither of them ate. The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick. Finally, Silas spoke again. His voice was quieter now, almost reflective. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd take the money and ask no questions. Someone who'd stay in the blue suite and be grateful for the rescue. He looked at her across the distance. Someone who wouldn't notice archived files at 2 in the morning. Sophie smiled without warmth. Sorry to disappoint, but you didn't buy a decoration. You bought someone's daughter. And my mother taught me to pay attention, to ask questions, to never assume the surface story is the truth. What happened to your mother? Cancer, 10 years ago. She was 41. Sophie picked up her water glass, more for something to do with her hands than thirst. She knew my father was gambling, knew the money was disappearing. She tried to stop it and it killed her. The stress, the fighting, the constant fear. So I learned early, numbers don't care about stress. They just tell you the truth. Silas was quiet. Then I'm sorry about your mother. Are you? The question came out sharper than Sophie intended, but she was tired of polite fictions, tired of performing gratitude for a transaction she didn't choose. Silas's expression hardened. Be careful, Sophie. I bought you 2 years of security. Don't waste it on misplaced anger. You bought collateral. You bought a guarantee that my father stays in line. Don't pretend this is rescue when it's just leverage. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Silas stood. Dinner is over. Go back to your room. We haven't finished, I said, go. His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath now. Authority. The weight of a man who'd built an empire and didn't tolerate insubordination. You wanted truth. Here it is. You're here because I needed a solution to a problem. Your father's debt gave me legal coverage for a land acquisition I needed. The marriage contract prevents his creditors from interfering while I restructure his company. In 2 years, I'll have what I need, and you'll have enough money to start over. That's the transaction. Don't complicate it by pretending we're partners. Sophie stood as well. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them at her sides. Steady, controlled. Then don't complicate it by pretending you care whether I notice things. I saw the files, I told you. What you do with that information is your choice. But when this company collapses because someone you trust is sabotaging it from the inside, don't say you weren't warned. She walked out before he could respond. Down the corridor, through the glass walkway, back to the east wing and the blue suite that felt more like a cell with every passing hour. She locked the door behind her, leaned against it, let herself shake for exactly 60 seconds before she forced control back into her body. He was right. She was nobody here. An acquisition with no power, no standing, no credibility. Caroline had 7 years in operational control. Sophie had 8 days in observations she couldn't prove. But Sophie had learned something else from 2 years of forensic accounting. The truth didn't care about power or credibility. The truth was in the numbers. And if Caroline Vane was moving files, hiding data, archiving evidence, at 2 in the morning, then there was a trail. There was always a trail. You just had to know where to look. Sophie walked to her laptop, opened it, stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She texted Liam. 18 days passed. Sophie fell into a routine that felt like slow suffocation. She attended 2 charity galas with Silas standing beside him in expensive dresses Carolyn had selected, smiling for cameras, while his hand rested on the small of her back. The hand disappeared the moment the cameras did. They were photographed like a couple. They lived like strangers. He was polite in public. He was absent in private. But Sophie wasn't idle. She spent her days in the library officially reading novels, actually studying the Blackwood Industries' internal structure. She learned the filing systems, the access protocols, the hierarchy of who could see what. She learned that guest accounts had limited access, but weren't monitored as heavily as employee accounts. She learned that the library computer had been set up by an intern who'd save passwords in the browser's autofill function. Security through obscurity, the oldest mistake in digital infrastructure. On the 18th night at 1 in the morning, when the house was silent and the security guards were changing shifts, Sophie made her move. The library was dark. She didn't turn on the lights. Used her phone's flashlight to navigate to the computer terminal in the back corner, one designated for guest use. Logged in. The autofill password manager popped up helpfully. Would you like to use the saved password for Blackwood vendor portal? Sophie clicked yes. Access granted. She wasn't in the main server. That would have required credentials she didn't have. But she was in the invoicing system for external contractors. Every company that did business with Blackwood Industries filed through this portal. Construction firms, security consultants, legal services, catering companies. Everything was here organized by fiscal quarter, searchable by vendor name or transaction amount. Sophie started searching. She pulled up the last 6 months of transactions sorted by amount, looking for patterns. Most of it was standard. Construction invoices for building projects, security contracts for the estate guards, legal fees from Hayes and Associates, all documented, all normal. Then she found it. Red River Logistics, LLC, $50,000 per month every month since August of last year. 14 months, $700,000 total. Category Security Consulting, approved by Vane. Payment method wire transfer to Cayman Islands account. Sophie's pulse quickened. She opened a new tab, Googled Red River Logistics. No website, no LinkedIn profiles, no business listings. She checked the Delaware Corporate Registry. Red River Logistics, LLC, registered August 2022. Agent of record listed as a law firm in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. A shell company. The kind you set up when you didn't want anyone tracking where money was going or coming from. She went back to the invoicing portal, dug deeper, found the bank routing numbers for the wire transfers, all going to the same Cayman account. No invoices attached, no work product documented, just money flowing out every month to a company that didn't exist in any meaningful sense. Sophie pulled up a spreadsheet, started cross-referencing dates. Every payment to Red River Logistics corresponded with a budget adjustment somewhere else. She found the pattern in the security infrastructure spending, the perimeter sensors that needed replacing, the patrol vehicles that needed maintenance, the surveillance systems that needed upgrades. Every time $50,000 went to Red River, the actual security budget got cut by the same amount. Someone was stripping the security budget, funneling it to an offshore shell company, and that someone had approval authority and the access to hide it. Caroline Vane. But why, if Caroline wanted to embezzle, there were easier ways. She was COO. She could create fake vendors, inflate invoices, skim percentages. Why set up a shell company and systematically weaken the estate's security infrastructure? Unless the point wasn't theft. Unless the point was vulnerability. Sophie sat back, her mind racing. If the perimeter sensors were failing, if the patrol routes were under-maintained, if the surveillance systems had gaps, then Obsidian Ridge was exposed. And if someone wanted to attack Silas Blackwood, wanted to hurt him, or worse, then a compromised security system was exactly what they'd need. The bandage on Silas's arm, the exhaustion in his face, the way he'd looked when Caroline mentioned being careful. He was being hunted. Someone was getting through the perimeter, and Caroline was the one creating the holes. Sophie's phone buzz, text from Liam package delivered to address you specified, burner phone in the hollow oak like you asked, frequency cloner in the magnetic case. Sophie, please be careful. This is insane. Sophie deleted the text, closed the browser, cleared the cache, logged out. The library computer showed no trace that she'd been there. She walked back to the blue suite. Dawn was 2 hours away. She had evidence now, not proof, not yet, but evidence. A pattern of payments to a shell company, a corresponding pattern of security degradation. The question was what to do with it. If she went to Silas, he'd dismiss her again. He'd made that clear at dinner. Carolyn had 7 years of trust. Sophie had 18 days of suspicion. He'd listened to his COO, not his contracted wife. So Sophie needed more. She needed to know where the money went after it hit the Cayman account. She needed to know who Red River was actually paying. She needed to follow the trail all the way to the end until the evidence was so overwhelming that even Silas couldn't ignore it. And to do that, she needed to go somewhere she'd been explicitly forbidden to enter. Somewhere dangerous, somewhere that could get her killed if Caroline found out. She needed to go underground. The next morning, Sophie was drinking coffee in the kitchen when Caroline appeared. It was 8 a.m. early for the COO, but Caroline looked like she'd been awake for hours. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, crimson suit that probably cost $5,000. She poured herself sparkling water from the fridge, leaned against the counter, looked at Sophie like she was an insect that had wandered into a space it didn't belong. Sleep well. Caroline's tone was pleasant. The words were a threat. Fine, thank you. Sophie kept her voice neutral. I don't sleep much. Too much work. You know how it is. Oh, wait. She smiled. You don't know. Your decoration. Your job is to look pretty and stay quiet. Sophie sipped her coffee, said nothing. Sometimes silence was the best weapon against people who wanted a reaction. Caroline pushed off the counter, walked closer, invaded Sophie's space, deliberately testing to see if the girl would back down. I heard about your little performance at dinner, questioning file locations, playing detective. She leaned in. Her perfume was overwhelming, expensive, and chemical. Here's some free advice, sweetie. This company is complex. We handle billions in transactions across 6 states. Files move for 100 legitimate reasons. Just because you took some college classes doesn't mean you understand how real business works. I understand that data doesn't archive itself, Sophie said quietly. I understand that shell companies in the Cayman Islands are usually red flags. And I understand that when someone gets defensive about questions, it usually means there's something worth hiding. Carolyn's eyes went ice cold. You're playing a very dangerous game, little girl. I'm not playing anything. I'm just observing. Then observe this. Caroline's voice dropped to a whisper. Silas Blackwood is mine. I've been building this company with him since before you graduated middle school. I've stood beside him through expansions, recessions, hostile takeovers, federal investigations. I know every strategy, every weakness, every pressure point. You're a contracted employee with a 2-year term. You mean nothing to him. You are nothing to him. If you keep causing problems, I will make sure that contract gets voided. And then I'll watch your pathetic father lose everything while you crawl back to whatever trailer park community college you came from. The kitchen door swung open. Silas walked in. He looked worse than yesterday, pale, moving stiffly, the bandage back on his arm. He stopped when he saw them. Caroline. Sophie. Caroline's demeanor shifted instantly. The ice melted into professional warmth. Mr. Blackwood, I was just discussing the charity gala next week with Sophie, making sure she understands the dress code. Silas looked between them. He wasn't stupid. He could read the tension in the room, the way they stood too close, the way Caroline's smile didn't reach her eyes. But he didn't comment, just walked to the coffee machine. Caroline, I need those Copper Ridge reports, today. Not summaries, raw data. Of course, Caroline said smoothly. I'll have them by noon, full forensic trail. Original EPO filings, all correspondence, complete financial breakdowns. Caroline hesitated, just for a second, but Sophie saw it, the flicker of something that might have been panic. That's a lot of data to compile. It'll take time to organize properly. Then don't organize it. Just send everything. Some of those files are preliminary. They'll look messy without context. Silas turned, looked at Caroline directly. I want them by noon, all of them. Or I'll have I pull them directly from the archives. Caroline's jaw tightened. Of course. Whatever you need. She left, heels clicking away faster than usual. Almost running. Almost. Silas poured his coffee, didn't look at Sophie. You were right about the archives. The timestamps don't match Caroline's story. Sophie set down her cup carefully. What are you going to do? What I should have done 3 weeks ago. Audit the entire project. He took a sip, winced like it hurt to swallow. If there are problems, I'll find them. And if Caroline is hiding something, then she'll answer for it. His voice was flat. Final. He turned to leave, then paused. Sophie, be careful. Caroline doesn't make idle threats. If she feels cornered, she'll strike. And she knows how to hurt people where they can't fight back. I know. Sophie met his eyes. That's why I need you to listen to me. Really listen, because what I found isn't just about Copper Ridge. It's about Red River Logistics. It's about $700,000 going offshore for security consulting that never happened. It's about your perimeter sensors failing at the exact times those payments went through. Someone is systematically weakening your defenses. And I think I know why. Silas went very still. How do you know about Red River? I told you, I'm good with numbers. And I'm very good at following money. That's a classified vendor. You shouldn't have access, I don't. I shouldn't, but I do. Sophie stood, looked him in the eye. Someone has to pay attention. You're too busy running an empire. Caroline is too busy running something else. So I looked, and what I found scares me. Because if someone is creating security gaps, if someone is bleeding your defense budget, then you're not safe here. You're vulnerable. And the next time you come home with that bandage on your arm, you might not come home at all. Silas stared at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then go back to your room, Sophie. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment you told me about the archives. His expression was granite. Ice, I'm going to find out exactly what Caroline Vane has been doing with my company. And if she's been building what I think she's been building, then God help her. Because I won't. He walked out. Sophie stood in the kitchen, coffee gone cold in her cup, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done it. She'd made him listen, made him question, made him look. But Caroline Vane wasn't the type to go down quietly. And Sophie had just painted a target on her own back by speaking up. The next move belonged to Caroline. And Sophie had a feeling that move would come soon, would come hard, and would be designed to destroy everything Sophie was trying to protect. She went back to the blue suite, locked the door like Silas had ordered. But she didn't stay there. She couldn't, because the evidence she had wasn't enough. She had payments and patterns. She needed destination. She needed to know who Red River was paying, what they were buying, why they needed $700,000 over 14 months. And there was only one place that information would be, not in the digital systems, in the physical world, in the place Caroline thought no one would ever look. Sophie pulled out her phone, texted Liam, I need those schematics you mentioned, old mine tunnels, Sector 4, and I need them tonight. The response came immediately, and Sophie, no. That's suicide. Sophie typed back, I'm already dead if I don't prove this. Send the files. She hit send, closed her eyes, made peace with what she was about to do. Tonight she was going underground, into the old mining tunnels beneath Obsidian Ridge, into the dark places where Caroline Vane was hiding something worth killing for. And if Sophie was right, if the trail led where she thought it led, then she'd finally have the proof she needed to save Silas Blackwood from the woman who was systematically destroying him from the inside. The only question was whether she'd survive long enough to deliver it. The storm hit at midnight. Rain hammered the glass walls of the blue suite like fists demanding entry. Sophie dressed in darkness. Black jeans from the back of the closet, hiking boots she'd found buried behind designer heels, a dark hoodie that swallowed her frame. She looked like a burglar. She felt like a sacrifice. The schematics Liam sent showed ventilation shafts from the old coal mines bypassing the main sensors. Sector 4, north edge of the property. 2 miles through forest, then down into the earth where surveillance couldn't reach. Where Caroline thought her secrets were safe. Sophie slipped through the service entrance at 1 a.m. No guards, shift change. She'd timed it perfectly. The rain was brutal, soaking through her clothes in seconds, turning the ground to mud that sucked at her boots. She ran anyway, flashlight off, navigating by lightning flashes that turned the forest into a nightmare of shadows and reaching branches. 90 minutes. That's how long it took to reach the mine entrance. A rusted grate hidden behind boulders exactly where Liam's schematic said it would be. The padlock was new, digital. Sophie pulled the frequency cloner from her pocket, the device Liam had left in the dead drop, held it against the lock. Numbers cycled green in the dark. Click. The lock popped. The tunnel smelled like sulfur and rot. Sophie turned on her flashlight, descended into the mountain's throat. 20 minutes of walking through passages that grew narrower, darker, colder. Then light ahead. Artificial. Electric. Sophie killed her flashlight, pressed against the wall, crept forward until the tunnel opened into a cavern, an old junction point where mining carts once met. What she saw froze her blood. Crates, dozens of them stacked against the walls, stamped with logos Red River Logistics. One was pried open. Inside, military assault rifles. Boxes of ammunition. Not standard rounds, silver-tipped. The kind designed to punch through body armor, to kill with certainty. And people. 4 men around a portable heater. Not Blackwood security. Wrong clothes, wrong bearing, wrong everything. Mercenaries, scarred and armed and speaking in accents Sophie couldn't place. Russian, maybe? Eastern European? The kind of men you hired when you needed someone dead and couldn't afford witnesses. Sophie's hands shook as she raised her phone. One photo. That's all she needed. Evidence that Caroline was housing an enemy army inside Silas's territory. She turned off the flash, snapped the picture. The shutter made a sound like a gunshot in the silence. 4 heads turned toward her hiding place. "We have a rat," one growled in English. Sophie ran. Behind her boots pounded stone. Shouts in Russian. The tunnel that had seemed wide now felt like a coffin, pressing closed, stealing air. She sprinted up the incline, lungs burning, legs screaming. The entrance. She could see it. Rain and freedom and headlights. Blinding white directly in front of the grate. An SUV, the door opened. Carolyn Vane stepped out holding a black umbrella like she was attending a funeral. "I told you," Caroline sighed, shaking her head. "I told you not to dig Sophie. Why are you so difficult?" The mercenaries emerged behind Sophie, blocking retreat. Trapped. Caroline smiled. "You're bringing mercenaries into the territory. You want him dead." Sophie's voice shook. Not fear. Rage. "I don't want him dead, darling. I want him retired." Carolyn examined her manicured nails. "Silas is too sentimental. He refuses to expand aggressively, honors old treaties. Once these men injure him badly enough, the board will declare him unfit. I step in as CEO. It's a hostile takeover. Strictly business. He'll kill you when he finds out. He won't find out, because sadly his unstable young wife had a mental breakdown, ran away into the storm, slipped near the old mines, fell into a ravine." Caroline snapped her fingers. "Grab her." They came fast. Sophie fought, kicked the first one's knee, heard it crunch. He went down howling. But the second caught her hair, yanked her head back. The third punched her stomach. Air left her lungs. She hit mud, gasping. Carolyn walked over heels, sinking slightly, looked down with clinical indifference. Throw her back in the shaft, collapse the entrance, make it look like a landslide. They dragged Sophie toward the grate. She kicked, screamed, clawed. They threw her into darkness. She hit stone, rolled down the incline. Above Caroline's voice, "Do it." An explosion, deafening. The ceiling gave way. Tons of rock and earth crashed down, sealing the entrance. Light disappeared. Air filled with choking dust. Sophie crawled backward into the dark, coughing ribs, screaming. Trapped, buried alive. Her phone screen was cracked from the fall, barely functional. No signal anyway this deep. No one knew she was here. No one was coming. She thought of her mother, of Silas, of a life that would end in darkness because she'd been stupid enough to think she could fight people who killed without conscience. Her leg was pinned under a rock. She couldn't move it. Couldn't feel anything below her knee except pressure and distant throbbing pain. The air was getting thin. She had hours, maybe less. This was how it ended. 19 years old, married to a stranger, dead in a hole because she'd tried to save a man who didn't want saving. Sophie closed her eyes, waited for the dark to take her. Silas Blackwood stared at the financial reports Caroline had sent. Something was wrong. The numbers were clean. Too clean. Forensic accounting taught that real data had inconsistencies, human errors, the fingerprints of actual work. This looked generated. Artificial. He opened his laptop. Pulled up the master authorization logs, the ones only he could access. Typed his override code. Red River Logistics, LLC. Authorized by C. Vane. Date August 2022. Category Security Consulting. He drilled deeper. Found the bank routing numbers. Traced them. The money wasn't going to consultants. It was routed through the Caymans, then back into the country. Final destination, Ironclad Systems. A black market arms dealer. Why was his COO buying weapons with company money? At 2:47 a.m. Silas woke. Not from sound, from absence. The house felt wrong. He'd learned to trust his instincts in the Rangers before Harvard, before billion-dollar deals. When something felt off, it usually was. He checked the security feed, a habit from years of threats. The blue suite, empty, door ajar. He rewound, watched Sophie leave at 1:03 a.m., watched her disappear into darkness. His phone rang, gate security. Sir, perimeter breach, Sector 4 2 hours ago, and seismic sensors registered a collapse. Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures near the old mines, unauthorized. Sophie, Silas whispered. He didn't call security, didn't wait for backup, ran to the garage. His Tesla drove through the storm at speeds that would have killed anyone else. The road to Sector 4 took 30 minutes at legal limits. He made it in 12. Caroline's SUV was there. Overturned now, crumpled like a toy. Silas's vehicle had hit it, doing 90 momentum, and rage turning steel into a weapon. He exited. Caroline was crawling from the wreckage, face bleeding. 4 men stood by the tree line. Mercenaries, Ren. They raised weapons. Silas was faster. He'd been special forces before he was a CEO. Knew 50 ways to kill and had chosen restraint for 20 years. That restraint ended tonight. The first mercenary raised his rifle. Silas closed the distance in 3 strides. Grabbed the barrel, twisted. The man's trigger finger snapped. Silas drove his elbow into the temple. He dropped. The second fired. Bullets sparked off stone. Silas was behind cover, moving flanking. Came up behind him, arm around throat. Carotid pressure. 8 seconds. The man went limp. Third and fourth together. Smart. They separated, tried crossfire. Silas picked up a rock. Threw. Hit one in the face. Bone crunched. While he reeled, Silas charged the other. Took him down hard. Ground fighting. Mount position. 3 strikes. Deutschen. Yster. Orbital. The man stopped moving. The last mercenary ran. Silas didn't chase. The Blackwood security guards Caroline had brought fell to their knees, surrendering. They knew better than to fight their alpha. Silas walked to Caroline, grabbed her throat, lifted her off the ground one-handed. Where is she? She fell, Caroline choked. Mine collapsed. Accident. If she's dead, I will destroy you in ways that make death look merciful. He threw her into the mud, turned to the surrendered guards. Dig. They tore at the rubble. Silas joined them, hands bleeding, lifting boulders that should have required machinery. Sophie, he roared into the darkness. Inside the cave, Sophie heard. Grabbed a rock, banged it against metal track. Clang, clang, clang. I hear her. Silas tore through the barrier with bleeding hands, made an opening, reached through. Found her. I've got you. He wedged his shoulders under the slab, pinning her leg. Veins bulging. Roared, heaved upward. Pull your leg out, now. Sophie dragged herself free, screaming. Silas dropped the rock, scooped her into his arms, held her against his chest, buried his face in her neck. He was shaking. I've got you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He carried her out past the arrested Caroline, past the broken mercenaries. A medical helicopter waited on the ridge. Don't leave me, Sophie whispered. Never again. You're my wife. You're my partner. I will burn this empire before I let anyone hurt you. He meant every word. 3 days later, Sophie woke in the estate's medical wing. Silas was asleep in a chair beside her bed, head resting on her hand. His hair was unwashed, stubble dark on his jaw. He'd been there the entire time. Caroline? Sophie's voice was rough. Silas's head snapped up. Relief flooded his face. In holding cells. Trial tomorrow. You need to testify. Then wheel me there. The tribunal hall was packed. Sophie in a wheelchair, leg casted, ribs wrapped. Caroline was dragged in, disheveled and furious. This is ridiculous. Security test. She panicked. Sophie pulled out her phone. Cracked, mud-stained, but the recorder had survived. Voice recorder works fine. She played it. Caroline's voice filled the room. I don't want him dead. I want him retired. Hostile takeover. Throw her in the shaft. Collapse the entrance. Some silence, then chaos. The mercenaries confessed, Silas added. To the weapons, to everything. Carolyn slumped. I did it for the company. You were too soft. Silas looked at Sophie. Your judgment. Death is easy. Take everything instead. Assets seized, corporate blacklist. No company will ever hire her. Silas marked Caroline's file. Traitor. She was dragged away screaming. 6 months later, spring came. Sophie worked in her office, former Blue Suite converted to workspace. Chief Compliance Officer. Real title, real power. Silas entered with an envelope and lighter. The marriage contract. The debt is paid. Silver Creek is solvent. He burned it. They watched ash drift away. Then he knelt, pulled out a ring box. Moonstone changing colors. Sophie Mercer, I don't want a transaction anymore. I choose you because you saw the man when everyone else saw the monster. Marry me for real this time. Yes. They kissed. First real kiss in 7 months of marriage. 6 months after that, a small wedding. Silver Creek and Obsidian Ridge families together. Liam as groomsman moved on and happy. Richard Mercer, sober walking, Sophie down the aisle. At the reception, Silas spoke. A year ago, I bought a bride. Today, I married the woman who saved my life. Final shot, Sophie and Silas on the balcony overlooking merged territories. Sophie's voiceover, they thought I was collateral. They were wrong. I was always the queen.